So we'll get started. Good afternoon, everybody, and morning for those of you in the other parts of the country. And my name is Sudeshna Das. I direct the ADC of the Massachusetts. I direct the Data and Statistics Core of the Massachusetts ADRC, and which is one of the oldest ADRCs and has been around for the last 35 years. And my background is in bioinformatics and computational biology, and I worked in the industry for about 10 years doing informatics systems and genomics analysis before I came to the MGH, and I've been associated with the Massachusetts ADRC for the last 6 years or so, and recently took over leadership formally about 6 months back. And I'm going to hand this over to Mark, who's going to talk a little bit about the fall ADC meeting, and then we can get started.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sudesh. I really appreciate you taking this on. I just have a couple of announcements. The fall analytics workshop that we developed that happens on the Thursday before the meetings, Thursday afternoon. We have a room that seats 40, and 42 people have signed up to participate in it. So I guess we're going to close registration at this point at that. But there will also be on the regular program on Saturday afternoon a session from the data analytics group, and so I hope folks will be able to attend that if they're at the St. Louis meetings. This is the third of our series of webinars for this year, and in some sense this was a bit of a pilot to see if we would have an audience, and we're just so pleased that so many have joined these seminars and webinars, so I think they've been very helpful. So we'll plan on doing some more, another series of them next spring, and so be thinking about it. If you want to present something, we'll send out a solicitation. And the folks at NACC make this so easy. We really appreciate their help. So maybe I'll just turn it back to you now, Sudeshna, and thank you again.
Yeah, sure. So this afternoon I'll be talking about how we are transitioning to an electronic data capture at the Massachusetts ADRC. And this is supposed to be an informal and interactive. And so anytime you have questions, please feel free to stop. And thank you again, Mark and Elizabeth, for setting this up. Okay. All right. So the outline is, I'll just first get started with why we chose to go to the EDC route and how we settled on REDCap as our tool. Talk about our planning phase, our implementation phase. And then the lots of challenges that we faced as we started doing this, and we thought that would be helpful for anybody else who was making this journey like the MADRC. And briefly introduce our linkage system, which links data from our clinical database, which we are implementing with REDCap, with all the other databases that we have from the other cores. And then end with like future directions. So background, so why we got started on this process, and this is, we got a feedback as we were doing our 5-year center renewal from a couple of reviewers that that data was getting entered into paper forms, and there was like a dated use of informatics systems. And that's what that grant feedback, I guess, not ashamed to say, is what spurred us into this process. But then we also talked to like the research assistants, and for them, we realized that having an EDC would improve the efficiency for data entry, and also interacting with the patient and the informant as they come in for visits. And for physicians, for them, it was the advantage for them was that it was an easy way to reference to like previous notes and previous data on a subject that they were actually seeing. And researchers again would have faster access to the complete data set. And overall, we thought this were, these are all very, there's nothing novel here, that having an EDC, we would reduce duplication of redundancy of data entry by multiple people, multiple systems. And I'll go into a little bit about what those systems were. And it would help us replace systems that we've had in the place for years at this point, and we don't know how to support the technology. And going forward, it would be having EDC with REDCap would help us add additional data fields and provide an opportunity to quickly do data capture that we were not doing previously. So I like to think of this as, an analogy is like simulated annealing. Those of us from the computer science world, you might be stuck in a low local minimum, which we had been, believe it or not, for if not 35 years, at least for the last 20 years, we were comfortable with our local minima. We're going to increase the entropy of the system, blow everything up, and then hopefully we'll come to a minimum that is, if not global, but at least lower than the minimum we were stuck in. So right now we are in that entropy process. So we started off with like doing a survey with all from all the ADCs, and to our surprise, and we were very happy about this. Many of you may have remembered the mail shot to this NACC data mailing list. We asked this question, how are the other ADCs doing a data capture? And very pleasantly surprised that 16 of these ADCs responded. So I think that's more than half. And we got some very sage recommendations from everybody that about EDC. One is you have to, if you're doing EDC, then you have to have a dedicated, stable, secure network. Always keep paper forms as backups. And if you wanted to use devices, then Surface Pros were preferable to iPads, and laptops and having keyboards were always helpful. And most importantly, don't try to do fillable PDFs or optical character recognition from PDFs, or use the REDCap mobile application. Just use the REDCap web-based data entry. So these were all really helpful tips that we wanted to keep in mind. And these were how the various ADRCs responded to how they do EDCs. And you can see a theme out here that most EDCs seem to be using REDCap for their data entry. And so we decided to go ahead with REDCap. And there were various reasons. And for us, it was really important that we had institutional support. And just a tidbit of information, REDCap happens at Partners to be the largest installation of REDCap, other than Vanderbilt, where it was created. So Partners is, Partners is a group of hospitals, including MGH and Brigham and 15 other hospitals in the Boston area. And they have validated REDCap to make sure that it meets HIPAA compliance. So having that institutional support was very important for us. And we also investigated and saw that it was easy to implement because you could reuse existing data dictionaries. If you needed to add new fields, that was okay. And there were APIs, and you could do data import and export using CSV files, and all of these were really important for any EDC that we were going to go ahead with. And REDCap, as I said, was also the most frequently used EDC at the other ADRCs. And so it was really, very helpful to us because we would be able to leverage all the ADC REDCap infrastructure that the other teams had already developed. So these are the ones, we're really grateful to all the ADCs, but in particular to Suzanne Hunt, who spent hours talking with us on the phone and gave us the data dictionaries for not only the UDS 3, but also the FTD, LBD, and the Neuropath modules, to Alice for sharing with us the R code that extracts data from the REDCap repository and does a NACC submission with it, and Kevin from the University of Florida, who shared with us his NACC calculator program, but also lots of tips on how to set up REDCap and how to use REDCap. So a big thank you to all of you. We wouldn't have gotten this project started if it wasn't for you guys. So thank you again. Well, so we decided to transition to a REDCap-based EDC at the MADRC. And I'm going to switch gears and talk about how we started this process and start with like how we did all the planning. Our planning process, we wanted to first get an overview of what the existing data flow was. So we actually spent quite a bit of time shadowing physicians as we got in touch with our admin who manages the schedules of the physicians and the subjects who come in for visits. And we shadowed about like, I don't know, about at least a dozen physicians, and just to see how they were using the data from past visits, or how they were interacting with paper forms or the patient as they were evaluating the patient, or I should say the subject. And we also shadowed the research assistants and attended consensus meetings of the physicians where they come up with like the consensus diagnosis for any subject. Spent quite a bit of time documenting requirements, and developed a schema of the current process. And that allowed us to assess like the existing tools and gaps, and how we would use REDCap. And once we had all of these in place, we created a project plan and went on to the implementation phase. So this is our current process, and this could be very similar or different from how the other ADCs do it. But so we have three primary roles in this whole process. We have the administrator who schedules these visits and sends packets of information to the participants in advance of the visit. And then if there are new participants, they register them and the new participant, and they record the the date they were scheduled for. And all of this work gets done in an Access database. And the reason they use Access is because it has this nice integration with Word, where they have all the letters that are getting sent out, and they like to use Access for this process. The physicians obviously examine and evaluate the participant, and they fill out 5 of those forms. So they fill up really the CDR, which is their rating on the dementia scale, the FAQ, and the results of their neurological exam. And they also record like when symptoms started and the other medical conditions. And they do all of this while they're evaluating and examining the participant. But a few days later, once they have had access to the neuropsych test results, they actually come up with a clinical diagnosis. So that happens a few days later than the actual visit. The research assistants at our ADRC administer all the neuropsych tests, and there are quite a few of them, as you all know. And they fill out all the A forms, and then they also do the physical. They're the ones who take the blood pressure, height, weight, and they enter all that data, as well as all the NPIQ, the depression scale, and bulk of their work is in doing all administrating the neuropsych tests. And once they have the folder from the dossier of the participant from the physician, they take all this data and they upload all these packets directly into the NACC repository. And they also enter this data in the Access database, which is the same database that the admin uses for registering the participant, but it also has all these UDS forms, and they enter the data. So all of this is happening, data entry is happening 3 times at this point. And once the data is in NACC, then we run reports and queries using a system where we download data from NACC and build views to do reporting and querying. So that's our current process. And we also had like several systems that I alluded to. Not only do we use the, we're all required to use the NACC repository for the clinical and demographic data. We have 3 other systems. One is built off of Access. One is Lava, which we installed like about 10 years ago at this point, and Lava is developed at CSF. And it served us well for a while, but UCSF has moved on to using Qualtrics, and it's developed in Java. And at our center, we had no expertise on Java, and so we wanted to move away from Lava. And then we had a brain bank system which was using FileMaker Pro, and again built I think 25 years ago at this point, and we needed some new fresh look at that system. So as I said, we took lots and lots of notes, and just to give you an idea, and came up with a bunch of requirements. So very simple things like the physician said like, oh, maybe the RAs know by heart what an A1 and B2 is, but we need the actual name of the form instead of the codes, and that would be helpful for us. And then the physicians, those of you who have used REDCap, it's a little awkward to find a particular person. So the physician wanted a dashboard of all their subjects by name and their date, so that the person they're seeing that day was right at the top, and the one that they're seeing last week was right next to it, and so on. And they also wanted some color coding to indicate its status of where that process was. And while they were entering data, they wanted to take a look at their the CDR from the last visit and other relevant information about notes that they had on the subject from the participant's previous visit. And if we were using an electronic data capture, it behooves us to do things like, if you have the individual component scores of the sum of boxes, we should definitely be able to add that up using an electronic system. And same thing for MoCA. And since for the neuropsych test, NACC's given us formulas for with the norms for how to calculate the Z-scores. We also wanted to have those available in the REDCap in line with the raw scores, because that again was being calculated manually using like an Excel formula sheet and so on. And in addition, we had a large number of like center-specific fields and forms that we needed to move over if we wanted to, go to a full EDC versus a mix of paper forms and electronic capture. And one thing I skipped, sorry, was the doctors, when they're looking at a patient's records, and while the patient is there and they're examining them, they need to look at multiple forms together. And we actually haven't had a quite a solution for how to do that, because switching back and forth from forms in REDCap is a few clicks, and it's not the easiest thing to do. And that is one place where paper forms have an advantage, where you could just lay the different forms out for people to see. So anytime in this, please go ahead and stop me if you have questions. So just wanted to outline, give a sense for how many different other forms that we have at the MADRC. So in addition to all the UDS forms, the FTLD, LBD, the Spanish and modules, and the neuropathology modules, etc. We have other forms that the clinicians use very frequently as they are evaluating a participant. So one of them is the activities of daily living. So that is something probably other ADCs used as well. And Steve Gumpertz, who is our LBD expert at the MADRC, he has some Benton visual scores that he currently keeps a record of in Excel. And one of the forms that all our physicians use for coming up with their CDR is the Okiriki form. And Dr. Okiriki is another MADRC physician, and she developed questions to ask which would be helpful to come up with the CDR. So again, these are very structured questions that lead to the CDR. And in addition, we had a lot of fields in LAVA that were center specifics, supplemental tests, and informant forms. And in addition to the NACC, longitudinal study, we also have a registry of patients that come to visit our memory disorders unit. So we have a whole database for our registry of patients, and a whole bunch of other things that we were capturing in LAVA, and yet another big list of fields that we are capturing in Access, including the non-de-identified or the identifiers of the subject, because in NACC, it's all de-identified, so things like the name and their address and things are being captured in Access. So just to give you an idea that we were dealing with lots and lots of data in addition to all the UDS data that we got data dictionaries for. So with all of that, we came up with a new process where we decided it would be most efficient for our administrator to continue to use Access for scheduling the visits and as well as communication with the participants about the results of their evaluation and the next visit and so on. And we're going to continue to do that, but I would be curious to see how other ADCs are handling that, and whether Access is really the best way to implement those needs. And then with REDCap, the bulk of the data entry would be done by the physicians and the research assistants directly into the REDCap database, all the EDS forms and the modules. And then we would be using the R scripts from Malaysia to pull out this data and deposit it into the NACC repository. And as I mentioned before, that our center is 35 years old, founded in 1984. So we have a lot of data, and what we decided was we would only move the UDS 3.0 data to REDCap, and the previous data would continue to reside in the various legacy systems that we already have in place. But it was going to be too much effort to get everything into REDCap. So, and then we also said, okay, to do all of these requirements and to implement this new process, we of course need to set up all the IT infrastructure, set up REDCap, make sure there's Wi-Fi in the rooms where the participants are being evaluated, and set up all the data dictionaries, import all the UDS 3.0 data and the other data into REDCap, add all our center-specific fields, and per our requirements, do all the enhancements and the customizations such as a dashboard, calculated fields, and so on. And so that gave us a way to build a project plan, which started off in February, and our goal is to have it deployed this year. And we are still not using REDCap yet, but we wanted to develop the project plan and have the plan in place. Okay, so with all of that, we started our implementation phase. And I'm just going to share with you some screenshots of how, you know, once we implemented the data dictionaries, how we did some of the customization in REDCap, and with the hope that these would be useful. And as we talk about other things that we're still struggling with, I was hoping that some of you may have solved some of these problems. So here's a screenshot of the dashboard for Dr. Plaka. She's one of our physicians here, and she's the clinical core co-leader. So you can see that, you know, she can see all her here. This is toy data, so obviously it's not 3 records. So she can see the list of all her the participants that are assigned to her, and the ones that she'd seen previously as well. So, and a quick link to for all the follow-up information and the forms that she needs to fill out for that participant. And again, notice that you know, we only have in this dashboard the forms that the doctors fill out, and not all the 32 forms from UDS. And just to make things easier and cleaner for our physicians, because they're busy and they're evaluating the participant, they have an hour and a half to fill out all this data. We want to make it as easy for them as possible. And this is just an FYI. These doctors use in the hospital Epic, and I don't know how many of you use Epic in your hospitals. So just to FYI, we had a very low bar threshold to improve upon. So as long as we were better than Epic, which can drive the doctors like really crazy, we were okay. And this is an example of bookmarks and links. For example, calculating the if and when we start using GUIDs, how to get to the NIA supported GUID portal, drug lookups, the means and the norms, and so on, and useful things that as we were gathering our requirements, we wanted to have the researchers and the research assistants at this point to have easy access to. And here's an example of, like, this is the CDR form, and this was easy enough. So as they fill out the 6 domains, they don't need to actually sit with a calculator or do this arithmetic in their head to come up with their CDR sum of boxes. The actual global CDR, we have a link to the calculation tool. And if any of you have actually implemented the logic for getting to the global CDR from the sum of boxes, we would be happy to have that, because, you know, again, that's one more thing that the physician needs to do once they have gotten their sum of boxes. And once they have computed the global CDR, they enter that, and this is the CDR form. These are just some small examples of enhancements that that we made to the REDCap forms. And going to go ahead and start off with, you know, describe all the challenges that we faced in this process, and limitations that we're still facing with REDCap. And you know, we had abundant challenges. Well, so I think the biggest in terms of tasks was adding all the other center-specific supplemental forms and data that was being captured in Access and in Lava and a host of numerous other databases and systems that we have acquired in our 35-year history here at the MADRC. So that was a lot. This may not be true for other ADCs, but we had a lot of new, different, lots and lots of forms that needed to be done. We are still, we know that we can implement the Z-scores for the neuropsych test, but if any centers have already done that, we would love to get those formulas. It's doable with piping and the formulas that REDCap allows us to do, but again, it's tedious, and if we do this, we'd be happy to share it with any other center that would like to have the Z-scores auto-calculated next to the NP scores, the raw scores. One thing that we haven't been able to solve with REDCap, and we are still going to have printouts, is how do you look at the Okereke form, which is what the physicians use for getting to the CDR. So these are questionnaire, and they ask these questions during the visit, but they also have the co-participant or the informant fill this out ahead of time in the visit, and they kind of compare these two notes to come up with the CDR. And all of this is happening while the subject is at the visit, and so we need an easy way of looking at these, and we can't think of any way other than really doing like printouts at this point. One thing that is annoying would be a 10-minute auto logout that REDCap imposes, and so you kind of have to be active, and during an hour or hour and a half visit, it's going to be annoying if you have to continually log yourself in, and I think there are settings, but we haven't been quite successful in getting rid of that 10-minute auto logout and make it like a 60-minute one. We faced some performance issues, and I was curious if other ADCs have it, but we do have at this point, you know, 500 active subjects, and with that amount of data, we are facing, you know, honestly, quite a bit of performance issues. And with any electronic data capture, there are risks of, you know, failures with Wi-Fi or the systems going down and so on and so forth. And those continue to be challenge, but they're not REDCap specific. They could happen with any EDC that we implement. So these are challenges and risks of having an electronic system, data capture system in the first place. And I'm sure none of you face this problem of competing priorities. When you have a nice plan in place, something else happens, and I'm sure we are the only people that face this particular problem. But as we were into this process, we had a catastrophic episode over here, and all our energy went on to solving that problem, and we had to pretty much put a hold on our project plan. And so those were challenges that we face and some limitations, as I mentioned, with how to look at multiple forms simultaneously and these auto logout issues. And we are continuing to work with improving our EDC and adding new fields and so on. Again, would love to hear other centers' experiences with similar challenges. So I'm going to switch gears right now and talk about our linkage system. And at the MADRC, other than our clinical database, which we are moving to REDCap-based data entry and capture, we also have databases from our other cores. For example, we have a biomarker database, and the sample management of that happens in FreezerWorks, and the subject and participant and study information is tracked in the biomarker database. And this biomarker database includes not only samples from the longitudinal UDS study, but also from a host of other studies. Then our Neuropath database, again, the Neuropath diagnosis and the parts of the NACC form, we want to move to a REDCap-based system, and then the sample management will happen with, will continue to happen with FreezerWorks. And both of these systems are not online yet. Currently, we are using, as I mentioned, the old FileMaker Pro database that was literally implemented 25 years back, where at that time we were, the center was ahead of its time, but clearly needs some rework here. Our clinical database, which is what we talked about, is, as I said, we're moving the UDS system to REDCap, and we'll also move our registry. Again, this is the registry of patients that come to our memory unit in the clinic at MGH, and they provide consent, and then the doctors fill out a one-page structured form about their diagnosis and recruiting information, and we have a pretty large registry of patients that come from our memory disorders unit. All the registration and scheduling is happening in Access. The imaging core uses REDCap for keeping track of their projects, and just like the biomarker core, imaging is done not only on the participants of the UDS longitudinal study, but also there are dozens and dozens of other studies that are going on at MGH and Brigham. Our recruiting, like our OR core, our outreach core, they also use REDCap to manage the recruiting and not only into the longitudinal study, but people from the longitudinal study get recruited to other studies. And they also do all the managing the recruiting for all the trials that are going on at Brigham and MGH. And finally, we also have an EHR database that we have for all the patients that came into our hospitals, and that right now that is a MySQL database. It's not REDCap. That's an error. And we have scripts that weekly or quarterly we pull data in from all these different systems and do some processing and transformations. So basically an ETL, if you would like to call it, and then import them into our linkage database. And our linkage database is called NLink. And for those of you who will be at the fall ADC meeting, I am actually giving a talk on this system at the pre-meeting workshop. In NLink, we have a subject-centric schema, and where we keep all the information related to the subject, like their names and identifiers and their basic demographics, and then we link that to a visit, which has information on the primary, the cognitive status, the primary DX, the diagnosis, the CDR, and so on, and integrate that with the biomarker information and the imaging information, as well as the neuropath diagnosis and the various BRAC, CIRAT, ABC scores, and so on. I should say that for the biomarker and the imaging, we only keep the metadata, meaning that we talk about when we had the blood draws and and a little brief summary of what data we have on them. And same thing for imaging. And especially for imaging, we don't keep, like, for example, whether they were PIP positive or what their hippocampal volume is, and all those details are with the imaging core and those researchers, and need like separate study consent and so on to get access to the actual data. So for the biomarker, we do have some of the actual biomarker readouts, but for most of the samples we don't. It's for both biomarker and imaging, we simply have the metadata. So we took this schema and we use a open source content management tool called Drupal to visualize and pull all this information in. And this is just the homepage, and we use the D3 libraries to do some nice visualization on stats and so on. And here, just to give you a little example, we pulled all this information, and it's very helpful for our researchers who are trying to recruit participants into their studies. For example, to look at how many subjects do we have scans on, an MRI scan that are E4 and have MCI as their cognitive status in their latest visit. So it allows us to basically do a flexible query with all the different variables that they want to collect together and query simultaneously all this information together. And again, I will be talking more about this at the fall ADC meeting. And so any of you who are interested in this, please come and be in touch. All right, so I think I'm breezing along, and just talk a little bit about all the things that we plan to do in future. And of course, our first task is to complete this rollout. And as I mentioned, we hope to get this done this year. And we'd be rolling this out in a phased transition, where we would have paper forms filled out by the physicians and the RAs, and then the RAs would, the research assistants would offline enter all this information into REDCap. And we are going to see how this process works for at least 2 months or 3 months, as we work out every detail that needs to work out for the actual data capture, before we start doing REDCap data entry using laptops, right? Because that is another layer where now, instead of doing paper forms and doing the data entry offline, we are directly entering data into REDCap. And then finally, we will venture into, can we do this REDCap data entry using devices such as iPads? So it's a long process, and we are doing this as a phased transition just to minimize our risks and make sure that we have a smooth transition. And at the beginning of the talk, I said we're doing simulated annealing, and we'll have high entropy, which is where we are still at. but some people call this being disruptive, and it happens to have good connotations these days, but we don't like being disruptive to the physicians who are busy and need to do their job, which is evaluating the participant, rather than getting distracted with challenges of a data entry system. So we want to be as smooth as possible. And then as we are done with our UDS transitions, we're going to start implementing REDCap for our MDU registry, our brain bank database. Those are our two main ones that we want to, again, move to REDCap so that we have a uniform way of capturing data and leverage information that has already been entered in one system, and so that we can just pull it from that repository into this current one. For example, like date of death is entered, I think we counted at least 6 different places and 6 different databases currently at our ADRC. So we want to make that process as normalization of information as much and to the extent that we can. So that's like, you know, for any informatics person, having denormalization is always a pain and a recipe for errors and puts a dent into the quality control of the systems. So we're trying to make sure, to the extent possible, that we have one place where the same information, one place where the data gets entered and then propagates to these other systems. And of course, we still have a lot of work to enhance and automate our data integration and writing those pipelines and tools, and developing our query interface. And we are also playing with like new visualization tools that we can use for visualizing the longitudinal trajectory and the neuropath diagnosis, as well as the longitudinal trajectory of the neuropsych scores, and how the CDRs correspond to the neuropsych scores, and so on. So lots of work, but we are right in the middle of it, and we hope to be in a much cleaner state and minimum that is more optimal than we were in. And with that, I'd like to thank the team. So Emily Merrill, who is here with me, she was the project manager, lead developer, and the only developer, right? Yeah, so she's the one who took on all this whole project, and the entire credit for this talk and all the work that we've done goes to her. And a big thank you to all our physicians, Dr. Hyman, who is our center director, and Dr. Blacker, Serrano, Dickersons, and Oakley, who spent like hours with us talking about how they do the data entry, how they do their work, and also allowing us to shadow them as they were seeing patients. And last but not least, our research assistants, Jane, Michaela, and Olivia, who again spent really hours and hours with us, talking to us how they do their work and what would make their life easier, and giving us ideas on how to improve our processes. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen it, Sudesha, but there's a few comments on the chat.
So let me see, how do I see that? I'm going to enlist my colleagues' help here to get to those chats. Okay.
One thing I can say is that our workshop, I'm sorry, is full, and there are a couple of questions about how to register for it, and we've capped registration, so we'll do it again next year.
Right, yes, okay, yes, sure. And you know, I'll be at the fall ADC from like Wednesday night to Saturday to very early Sunday morning. So feel free to come and say hi, and we can talk more about any of these processes. So the first question is from Will Affleck Ash, and he says, did some forms show other form values, example B9 versus D1, and at the time of the data entry? And MDA status is an override to status of MDA subjects who are followed until autopsy.
That was in response to, I think, a screenshot of one of the Excel documents that you had.
Oh, okay. Okay. So we can ignore that. So did some forms show other form values? I'll let Emily answer that question because, as I said, she's the one who did all the work.
Okay. They don't show it at the time of entry. We are going to be implementing the rules that will check so that all of the forms have unified entries when the rules are run, but it does not show at the time of entry. Auto pull CDR values from local stored table. That is a good idea.
Yeah, so we are reading out, so for those of you who can't see the question, so can we pull out the CDR prior values and show them in a color-coded way? Sure, that sounds like a really good idea. The workshop, as Mark said, is now full. Where can I contribute to NLink? Let's get together at the fall ADC. I'm sure we'll find some time and talk more. Is auto log out due to network or due to system setting? I think it's a system setting.
It's a system setting by the REDCap team.
Okay. Can you send us the PowerPoint? I have to make sure that, I'll take out some of our screenshots and make sure those are as a PDF before I can send this out. But that would be a question to Elizabeth. Is there a mechanism for sharing these slides?
Yes, absolutely. We can put them on the NACC website.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I have to do some scrubbing, making sure that we don't have any subject information that might have leaked in there. And I'll send them to you, and we can she'll post them on the NACC website.
Very good.
Do you have any email address? Okay, let me just. I'm gonna type my email address into this chat. Okay, so that's so for those of you who are interested in getting in touch with me, that's my email, and we can schedule if any of you are at the fall ADC meeting and are working through some of these very issues, please come and talk to me. I don't see what you typed. Oh, to all, sorry. Okay, do you see the email?
I see it.
Okay, all right, good.
Well, thank you. That was wonderful. That was clear and impressive work that you're doing there. I don't know, unless there's other questions or chats, maybe we can call this to close.
Sure, and all this impressive work, I have to say again, is Emily. She was really the one-person show for this whole project.
Okay, well, thanks everybody.
Yeah.
And thank you, Elizabeth.